he asked about your comment calling the president a fascist, and your answer was, both President Trump and I have been clear about our positions and our views. Are you affirming that you think President Trump is a fascist?
I've spoken about...
That's okay. You can just say yes.
Okay. All right.
Okay. It's easier. It's easier than explaining it. I don't mind.
And what I really appreciate about the president is that the meeting that we had focused not on places of disagreement, which there are many, and also focused on the shared purpose that we have in serving New Yorkers.
We had a meeting today that actually surprised me. He wants to see no crime. He wants to see housing being built. He wants to see rents coming down, all things that I agree with. Now, we may disagree how we get there, the rent coming down. I think one of the things I really gleaned very much today, he'd like to see him come down, ideally, by building a lot of additional housing.
Yeah.
We discuss crime, more than ICE per se. We discuss crime. And he doesn't want to see crime, and I don't want to see crime. And I have very little doubt that we're not going to get along on that issue. He wants to... And he said some things that were very interesting as to housing construction, and he wants to see houses go up. He wants to see a lot of houses created, a lot of apartments built, etc. And you know, we actually people would be shocked, but I want to see the same thing.
Would you feel comfortable living in New York City under a Mamdani administration?
Yeah, I would. I really would, especially after the meeting. Absolutely.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson, socialist and community college maths professor Michael Hoffman, and socialist Kenny Cepeda. We're online at whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. We have merch as well. If you would like a shirt, contact us to our site at whatsleftpodcast.com. All right. Thank you. Andy, I'll hand over the baton to you.
And I'm going to hand it over to Michael.
You sprung that on me, Andy.
Okay, I'll start.
No, it's okay. No, it's good practice. Okay, so I think, well, there was a great discussion on an email thread. Actually, I don't know if it was a great discussion. It was an interesting discussion. But I think what we're talking about is the election of Mamdani, and I would say the status of class forces, the balance of class forces as it comes to electoral politics in the United States. But also, you had mentioned making some connection to the Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I would add to that what Tucker Carlson is doing. There's sort of a little bit of a pseudo split in the right, that I think is also a similar dynamic. And most importantly, I think Eric Blanc wrote a piece about the history of socialism in the United States, connecting the turn of the century Milwaukee Socialist Party, who were known as the sewer socialists, essentially because they had basically they were known for running the municipalities like the sewer system well, and he was making parallels between that and the election of Mamdani. So I guess a great way to start the conversation is, what do we think about the election of Mamdani?
Well, I want to also say he wasn't just making a connection between it, but he was resuscitating it. I mean, there's a history among socialists of understanding like the betrayal, the deep betrayal of something like the German Social Democratic Party, which had millions of people in it and then literally collapsed in support of World War I, and an anti-capitalist, million people strong, many newspapers across the country, all sorts of institutional power and ways that it's built into the class basically in a heartbeat, in a sense, disintegrates when confronted with the major capitalist crisis of the 20th, one of the major capitalist crises of the 21st century. And crisis is the time when revolution is born, and at that very moment when the possibility of revolution exists, those socialists betray the cause and support the German the German war machine fighting Russians and things like that. So he is resuscitating that and saying, hey, look, Mamdani won, and there's something to look at these sewer socialists of ours back in the day. Maybe there's some and very much saying pragmatic Marxism, a Marxism of and there's some elements actually agree with things that he's saying, but how we can learn something from the pragmatic Marxism and making a connection between the success of those Milwaukee socialists and their ability to come into power within the municipality of Milwaukee, within the city of Milwaukee, and what's happened with Mamdani, and basically saying maybe there's something to follow here, maybe there's something to rebuild here, and maybe there's something for socialists and revolutionaries to learn out of this. And I found it. I mean, I don't agree with it. In reading the article, there are some things I would agree with in the context of building, but it really was again reminding me of why we made What's Left, and the complete collapse of the belief in revolution and the fight for revolution among socialists. That's one of the things there. But there's more to talk about in that article about that I want to talk with you all. And I thought there were some interesting points made in the thread, which I want to say I did not include Eduardo on because he's not a Marxist. But because of that, he is not as familiar with that article. So if Eduardo sounds like he doesn't understand the sewer socialism stuff, that's my fault because I forgot to send him the article. And hopefully he'll get caught up a little bit.
I'm trying to catch up a little bit.
I'd be happy to give a recap, though.
All right.
Yeah.
That was sweet. Michael, take it away.
Okay, so one of the things that's happening is that right now there's, and I would say really picked up since the Sanders campaign, a branch of the left has been focused on rebuilding a socialist electoral strategy. This socialist electoral strategy in the United States, they actually take most of their inspiration actually from FDR, in the sense that even Mamdani, when he went and visited with Trump, he had, he was most excited. There's like a picture of Mamdani and Trump standing in front of the FDR portrait in the White House. But you have intellectuals like Eric Blanc, and I have to say, I've known Eric Blanc for a long time. Eric Blanc and I have to say, he is a very capable, very intelligent. He also was a very good organizer. When we were both organizing, he was organizing at the high school nearby, Lowell High School, and I was organizing at SF State, and our demonstrations were a little, were small and spirited, and he had, huge demonstrations. So this is someone who came out of the tradition, like the Trotskyist tradition in the Bay Area. Eric Blanc, was steeped in multiple languages, learned multiple languages, traveled all over the world and met socialists from all over the world. And he is now what I would say the intellectual. He is one of the main intellectuals for what I would describe now as, really the right wing of the socialist movement in the United States, in the sense that he knows a ton of this history of socialism in the United States and is now using it essentially to I think, hammer against this idea of being essentially open revolutionaries. He's using the history, he's resuscitating a history basically in order to, like Andy said, I would agree, to basically give cover to the Democratic Party, because he's basically saying there's no way to build some fundamental alternative to the Democratic Party. So we have to kind of work within it. Like, in a lot of his writing, even before the sewer socialist thing, was about like defending AOC, like saying people were being too hard on AOC. She's mainly right on the Palestine question, right? And the interesting thing is that there's a way in which it's a little dishonest, that he goes all the way back past FDR to the sewer socialists, but it's also super apt, because one of the things that he does not talk about, and he kind of glosses over the history of the Socialist Party in the United States, was that it was oftentimes very racist, and it was really part of the American mainstream at the turn of the century. This is before the Russian Revolution caused a serious, split in the movement. And so really what he's doing, not just reviving, not talking about the sewer socialists, who basically were in power in Milwaukee from like the 1890s through, almost to like the 1950s or something. Like there's some continuity that stretches into the 20th century. But the Socialist Party in the United States was very much in the tradition of the most right wing of the European parties, who, like in the Social Democratic Party in Germany, they had one of the largest organizations anywhere in Europe. They had, things that I would love to have today, like, festivals, socialist festivals, big, big gatherings and social events and cultural events that were all tied to the concept of socialism. But when it came time, when the crisis came, like Andy said, they completely betrayed the working class, even though on paper they said they were for revolutionary socialism. By building essentially a very broad tent and trying to be successful within bourgeois democracy, they basically set themselves up so that when push came to shove, they would side with capitalism. And in a way, really what they're trying to do, what those politics are trying to do, and we call those second international politics, or at least I would call that the second international. The first international was founded by Marx, and I'm going to go through this because I don't know if people know this, but like the first international was founded by Marx, and essentially there was a big fight between the anarchists and the Marxists, but that's also in the context of the Paris Commune, right? You had an international movement. The second international arises a little later in the second half of the 1800s, and essentially is when socialism gets really popular, and it essentially dies because of its betrayal. So the second international socialism essentially was defeated by the Russian Revolution and what became the highest point of, I would say, revolutionary human history, because the Second International was swept aside in favor of real, genuine workers' democracy, which then also was not successful and was eventually itself defeated. But so like the politics they're trying to bring back are essentially to work within the politics of capitalism to try and make it friendlier. And it gives a lot of credibility for Eric Blanc to go through and like look at these socialists, who they were better at running the cities, right? But one of the main things that leaves out is that at that time you had a base within the trades unions. And what we do not have now, what Mamdani does not have, is any kind of working class base that would actually put any kind of leverage against the capitalists to implement anything capitalists don't like, right? So if you just look at the situation in New York, there's really no material basis for which Mamdani can actually impose anything, even if he actually really wanted to propose something controversial, which I don't even think he's actually saying. So I would just say this is the resuscitation of opportunistic socialist politics. And there's a way in which I understand where it's coming from, because the other kinds of politics are not successful. There's no revolutionary movement. And so I can understand why people would be attracted to that, especially new people. But from my reading of history and my reading of the situation, it's going to cause more problems, or it's going to make it less likely. It's going to cause people to turn away from the idea of socialism, and much more likely cause people to be less political by going in this direction.
And I guess what I would either add, maybe slightly different in terms of the biggest risk. Yes, I do believe it's maybe it would turn people to that's not it. I don't think that's my sense of what I worry about with it. That there's a question I will have is socialism, if it has any meaning, rises in relationship to capitalism, and rises as its revolutionary alternative, and as the thing that can solve the crisis that capitalism is going to lead us to, the common ruin of contending classes. And what you have in the German Social Democratic Party that failed that crisis in World War I is the very moment in which capitalism is emerging and exposing itself as deeply crisis-ridden and needing to be gotten rid of in order to not have millions of people killed. That at the very moment that happens, this umbrella, which is made for rain, like melts in the rain. Basically, it melts in the crisis. And I think he actually notes this in a bar graph. I guess maybe. So this is the article, and I would say everyone should read this because I think it's fascinating actually from in one level to say like what the nature of reformism and the pull of reformism on revolutionaries. And I would call Eric Blanc a revolutionary. He was, at least. And so if you look here, the Milwaukee Socialist mayoral results, when does it decline? Like when does it, and that's when does the party essentially end? It was like 1938. What's happening in 1938? We're talking about the entry into World War II. Like at the very moment that this mass party, that that is there to make a revolution at the moment of capitalist crisis, and the second crisis happens, World War II, the thing cracks open, not because of World War II, but in the run up to it. Like it just exposes to me that this, like, how could somebody look at this as a possible alternative when we are now in the run up to World War III, and we don't even have the mass base that Michael's talking about, like socialist papers and socialist Sunday schools and socialist carnivals.
It was very popular, right?
Yeah.
One of the inspiring things is that socialism was very popular in the United States.
But this size thing is a fantasy. Not that it wasn't a size. It is a giant Trojan horse crafted out of cotton candy, because at the first drop of water it melts away. So it has no meaning, and history has proven it time and time again. So I wonder what people are chasing when they chase popularity or chase size here, when we've seen over history that size plays absolutely no role in actually affecting real history. It might make nice parks in Milwaukee. That's what it did, apparently. That was like the thing he was most talking about, and took a stand against racism and probably did some nice things. But that's not the measure of socialists. That's not the measure of revolution. The measure of revolution is ending wage slavery, ending capitalist class relations, ending class exploitation by the capitalists, by removing that system and replacing it with something else, a system based by something that run by workers. And that, I think, I don't have an answer as to why socialists keep coming back to this, but all I can say is, as their hope rises, because people like Eric Blanc and others were basically very excited when AOC and and Bernie Sanders were giving speeches once Trump got elected about taking on the oligarchs. Like, you're saying, look how many people are coming to this, very excited. and talking about hope and talking about look, people are ready to fight back, and obviously he's very excited about Mamdani. There is something deeply poisonous in that kind of hope. And Victor Berger actually speaks of it himself. Victor Berger is the leader of the Milwaukee Socialists. He, in one of his quotes, basically says, the biggest thing we have that the working class lacks is hope, and we have to give them hope. And I think there's something incredibly dangerous in that. And I think what really it is socialists lying to themselves so they can lie to workers. But it's just keeps happening over and over again. And in this case, the horizons get smaller and smaller for the reformists, and yet they speak of so much grandiose optimism about what's happening in the United States or what's happening in Europe. And I think there's something very interesting about that for me, that revolutionaries amp up the hope even as their despair grows greater and greater.
One of the quotes that's always in my head, I have to read it, but it's like from Rosa Luxemburg, who talks, this is the quote. It says, "People who pronounce themselves in favor of the method of legislative reform in place of and in contradistinction to the conquest of political power and social revolution do not really choose a more tranquil, calmer, and slower road to the same goal, but a different goal. Instead of taking a stand for the establishment of a new society, they take a stand for the surface modifications of the old society. Our program becomes not the realization of socialism, but the reform of capitalism. Not the suppression of the system of wage labor, but the diminution of exploitation. That is, the suppression of the abuses of capitalism instead of the suppression of capitalism itself." And I always have that present, right? I think when I read Rosa Luxemburg, that was the first time when I was able to escape the DSA type of thinking. The liberal, the somewhat radical, and I found myself in 2008, 2009, January 2009 in Washington, in attending Obama's inauguration. And apparently Mamdani also worked for that campaign. So that was the starting point for his political kind of involvement. He says, listening to his platform. The other thing that he talks about is being inspired by Bernie Sanders, right? And he also has the full backing of AOC. And so I'm mentioning these names, right, because this is recent history. This is, people who are at the face of betrayal, in failure, right, and people who want to fundamental change, right, have to pay attention to what these people have given us, what they represent, right, and again, Mamdani, he's like the next iteration of these same characters that we've already put energy into, right? Like I was excited for Bernie Sanders and I had to learn my lessons, and so here again, right? Like we are, and like you said, Lipson, some people are resuscitating the possibilities of hope when when the evidence, I don't even have to look at like 1930s, whatever. I have to look like less than a decade ago. I have to look at AOC right now, right? Like what she's become. For some people, it was pretty immediate. That she's a fraud, and her role in this role of Bernie Sanders is to bring the straying people back into the fold of the tumble of the electoral politics. And so, again, I guess I'm talking to like younger people who might not know the history that you're sharing with us, and I have to say that I appreciate being in conversation with not all of you, but with Jeff, with all the other people that I don't know if they want to be named, but that are on that same thread, that we may not have full agreement, but I appreciate some sort of sobriety, right, that is brought up, and and that's why, you know, I'm doing this right here, right? Like, because I want to be able to talk about it, right? Like, because I've gone through that. I've learned my lessons. And I've had to learn my lessons. You can't tell people, like, you know, you kind of have to do it on your own. And I didn't know about Mandami until recently, because I really don't see any road in the electoral system, right? Like, and so I find it kind of appalling that you're telling me that people who have been in the struggle as long as you have are doing these kind of jobs. But I'm also not surprised given COVID, right? Like that, and also that we have different opinions. But the fact is that when I listened to Mandami in preparation for this episode, what I hear, there's nothing radical, not even a grain of radicalism. There is no real systemic analysis of shit. You know, all I see is more progressive fucking like platitudes, because you know, and you know, by this point, like, if you don't understand why tax the rich is bullshit, you know, like, I don't know what to fucking say. If you don't understand why rent control might provide some very short relief but create a bunch of shit of problems, and that is not about some fucking policy, that it's about capital, international capital, that is not just about your greedy neighbor, you know, that you're fighting big monsters, I don't know what the fuck to say, you know, like, in and so that's, I guess, that's my mission when we're talking about here about Mandami and what he represents, and when he's trying to be resuscitated or presented as an optimistic thing, is that there has to be more emphasis on the system, the analysis of the system, right? That's why I consider myself a Marxist, Marxian. I don't know what the fuck, but that's what's useful to me, right? To know that basic sort of systemic impulse, right, of capitalism, and to know that just fighting for wages is not gonna fucking work. It doesn't work. You know, like, look at the result in San Francisco. You know, like, the minimum wage is high. Look at the result in San Francisco of rent control. You know, so all these things that they're fucking pushing, they've already been tried. There is some sort of iteration of this thing in place that actually don't even, they might provide some relief to some people, but overall it actually exacerbates the problems that it's trying to solve.
Well, I mean, I share the sentiment with Kenny because I've also been, I actually participated in campaigns before, and previous campaigns, progressive to supporting even Bernie Sanders at one point. And I was at the speech of Cornel West in SF when he was convincing us to, and I was what, this in 2000, right before he was elected, to elect Obama as well. I mean, I think that I have had my share, just by sharing that I have had my share of disappointment, and I know that people, like Michael had said to us yesterday, people want hope, people want to believe. You know, he was speaking to about specifically someone that's related, that's in his life, and people want to have this experience. They want to be swept up by the chance of hope. You know, that's something that I think drives people, is this, or not necessarily, but it does give you this false mirage that there's something that you might just be able to achieve if you just believe. So anyhow, I see that Mamdani is taking pictures, selfies with George Soros' son, and we might just add that here in this edit. So that doesn't give me. How do I differentiate all the other politicians from him that have just have done the very same thing as well. I don't see him. How do we differentiate his candidate, his campaign from other politicians? They're taking pictures with sons of billionaires. I just want to say that I think I wouldn't meet the president. If I was really radical, I would try to organize at the bottom and topple and overtake the city. But yeah, I mean, if I had like not just me, I wouldn't be running. By the way, like I don't think that we should place all our hope onto one person. I think it has to be organizationally a mass of people.
I think it has to be said that it's not really clear what else to do to people. And that to me speaks to the effectiveness of the ruling class's control. That we have not been able to develop a culture of essentially politicized working class identity, meaning like people identifying themselves as workers who are political. So, if the only thing on offer is sort of an electoral format, then that's going to be the thing that gets energy. And then, but the thing that is frustrating though is the conscious elements, people like Eric Blanc, essentially saying that you can't ask for too much. You have to basically roll way back your expectations and your demands, and that what has to be built is that people have to be reached first, right? And so this whole idea is upside down from what we understood, what our model, and in fact, this is like the one of the fundamental things that Marx breaking from Hegel was that, hey buddy, hi.
Hi there.
Marx breaking from Hegel was basically like first people have to act, then the ideas will follow, right? And folks like Eric used that to say you have to first have people engaged in the most basic kind of thing, and he refers to the like these electoral campaigns as like more broadly spreading socially, like more reaching broader layers of people. But it's not clear how reaching broader layers of people with the ideas or the promise of an election actually then moves people into the action phase of standing up for themselves. In fact, it's the opposite from what I understand, which is like these socialist parties were built through the activity of working class people. It was not the other way around. So when he goes back and talks about the electoral successes, that's the thing that came after people were actually standing up for themselves. People were actually in motion, and that led to those kinds of successes. And those are not the things that, and those things, by the way, did not guarantee that they lasted very long. So, like, how do we actually support the growth of revolutionary confidence? It has to do with, I agree with the sense that we do need to reach broader layers of people. We do need many more people involved in activity. But when you do it through an electoral campaign, there seems to be like the kind of structure that you build in order to get someone elected. To me, it's still just centered on almost like a cult of personality. It's centered on the electoral process. It's not centered on what are we actually doing together as workers, right? It sort of spreads socialism as something you vote for, as opposed to spreading the idea that we as a class have to stand up for ourselves. So I do think it's essentially upside down. It's that they're saying that you can have a big popular you can have people from the top popularize the idea of socialism, and then they'll start acting from below. But I think the opposite is true. Is that when you make it seem like, oh, well, maybe we'll just get it at the ballot box, and then people actually stop. Or actually it slows down the process through which people begin to say, actually, we need to shut this down in order to control how production is happening, right? So I don't see a growth of militancy coming from above, essentially. And that's kind of what Eric Blanc, I think, is putting forward. That's the model being put forward here. And it's hard to argue with in a way when there's nothing, when workers otherwise are not really standing up for themselves. And just to point out, I loved what Kenny said, bringing up this idea of like there's this, this layer, this progressive layer. Catherine Liu calls it the professional managerial class. That's who was attracted to the Mamdani campaign. The Mamdani campaign was not workers. It was not like, majority working class people. It was majority educated professionals, college students. And, that's what the base of this kind of politics is.
And I would say, look, there's a problem we have for those of us who are talking about the need for revolution. Even as I say, what are you talking about, Eric? This is all wrong. Then the question is, well, what's right? Tell me what's right. Tell me what's working. Tell me what you're doing that's working. And the answer is nothing. Like, I can't speak to that. I can't provide an alternative. I can go back to the Russian Revolution and say that would be a model of maybe the kind of organizing that was done in the early part of the 20th century with the Bolshevik Party that led to that revolution. But then the question is, well, what happened to that? And where is it now? And where is your cause now? Like, gone, And so there is, I was asking myself what I would want from fellow revolutionaries at this time. I would at least want an acknowledgement that our ghost is cooked right now, that we don't know, that everything we've tried has failed. I think I think what I appreciate about like the Marxist study group we're part of, which is like, and Michelle, who's a listener, talks about that. And she brings up like, no, I don't like hope. Like, I think people who talk about hope are like, I'm very suspicious of them. And she brought up in the last group we were in, she brought up the philosopher Spinoza philosopher. Basically, what she was saying, like, Spinoza talks about fear and hope as both two sides of an equally paralyzing cause. One that gets you to look at what you are afraid, like what's coming in terror, and the other one that gets to look at what's coming with some optimism. But they are the position of a spectator to world events. And so fear is a killer, but hope is a killer as well. And I do agree that, like, so when Eric Blanc, when he talks about the problem, let me show this quote. It's an interesting quote, and I think it's one that people would go like, well, there's something to here, and I think there is something to it. Let me go and share my screen here. It's near the end of the article, and he says the central obstacle to moving forward. What he's saying here is many leftists in the past would say the central obstacle to moving further towards social democracy and socialism, and he should mean revolution when he says that. I hope that's what that does mean. Whether he means that or not, that's what it means, is revolution. The central obstacle to moving further towards social democracy and socialism in America was simple. The organized left and its allied unions were not powerful enough to convince the majority of people to actively support such an advance. And he thinks that's wrong. It's not about them not being powerful. He goes, this is a sobering fact. Well, actually, he's saying is right. This is a sobering fact to acknowledge, since it runs contrary to radicals' longtime assumptions that misleadership and co-optation are our primary obstacles to success. So he's saying, we've often said that it's been the misleadership of the left that has been the problem. He's saying, no, there's something about the American worker and the American circumstance that the organized left has not been, strong enough or powerful enough or being able to figure it out. There might be something there. but and I'd have to think about it more. But it's interesting to me in this article when he talks about the organized working class in the 30s, he's talking about Milwaukee, and there's no mention of general strikes in Minneapolis and San Francisco and Toledo. That's all happening in the mid 30s. These are like whole cities being led by strike waves, not just in one sector, but throughout the sector, and at times, and battles with police, for the control of the city, National Guard having to be brought in, like in order to speak. Like that's the problem for me of this is like, why is there not that honesty? If you're going to make your case and say, look, the American working class is just not radical, then you have to come to grips with that part as well. You can't just ignore it and say it didn't happen and just speak of the union movement in Milwaukee, which literally collapsed anyway and was not able to do anything in relationship to World War II. In fact, one of the biggest places for World War II production was Milwaukee, at the time. So it's that's confounding for me. Like, because if we're gonna come up with answers, it's gonna have to be built on some honesty. And my honesty is, I know that that second international socialism doesn't work. I know that. But I also have to say that the third international socialism that I myself find myself in lineage to also didn't work, or it fell short as well. And I have to ask and then I have to look at today and say, there's no landscape seemingly for working class struggle. And I do agree with him that one of the things he says in favor of the socialists in Milwaukee was their ability to connect to the real lives of people. I actually do think that's an important thing. Like, I do believe this is a belief, I don't know if this is the case, that revolutionaries have to connect to that, but they have to do that without opportunism. They have to do that without hiding their political cause. And that apparently has been a real difficulty on our part. So there's many riddles to solve. I just wish all my revolutionaries around the world would engage in these riddles more honestly, so that they're not hiding things just to be able to make their case. It's very damaging. That's what I would say. It's very damaging to trying to find a way forward.
Since I think some would argue that the unions are weaker, class consciousness is fractured, and that's why some would say just let's turn to people who are reformist socialists that are doing something, because we don't have that class consciousness that to build something, which is what is necessary and what we're arguing for. But if it's not there and time is gone by, then you would exert your energy onto people who are trying to make those reformist changes. But I don't know if that's what Kenny was probably something else. I'm not sure if we want to tackle that.
I don't know if you, Andy, or Michael want to respond to that, because I might shift a little the conversation.
My response to that is, what about the people who stopped ICE and Home Depot? What about what about some of the people who organized during COVID to basically say, no, you're like the Canadian truckers, and there were some elements like that in this country that the left castigated, but that was actually relatively independent, that was saying, no, you're not going to force me to do this mandate bullshit. So I agree with you that there's not much there, but it's not nothing. And I just think that I personally think people are chasing, again, I'm saying this not from a position of we have built something, but I think people are looking at the wrong things and they're chasing the wrong stuff. They're chasing polls, they're chasing elections, they're looking at sentiment and support for Mamdani as being an indication of growing radicalism, which it isn't. And I would say that if there's anything for growing radicalism, it would be people arming themselves in order to like defend themselves from the police or from the ICE or from people taking their property or BlackRock, you know. That would be, those are the elements of radicalism, whether they come from what people call the left or whether they come from the right. And there is a history of that. There is a history of don't tread on me. And I think, I don't think the working class in the United States is genetically different than any working class across the globe. I do think we have our own history. But I believe that workers in this country are capable of an immense radicalism, but on a mass scale, this is where I'm going to go back to what Steve Zeltzer said. None of us have seen it. It has happened, but we weren't alive to see it. And I appreciated him saying
that. I just say that
he did say that.
It's obvious that we're gonna have to make history, right? That, yeah, looking back, it's good, and it helps us hopefully not fall in the same traps. But I guess this is what Fabio kind of said, that there's a lack of imagination of the possibilities, right? Like, it doesn't exist, and I don't know if that kind of dances on the line of hope, and hopium. But yeah, I mean that right. Like, we're gonna have to make history, do something that is different. Our context is different, right? Like, that's what Michael is kind of saying too. That we live in a more technologically surveilled society, right? Like, the propaganda is more intense, individualized. Like, we also, I think the question of who the fuck is the working class comes up, and like, that's kind of what I responded on that thread, that what I think that Mamdani represents is more of that educated, underpaid sort of, or unrewarded managerial, aspirants, or the people who aspire to be in the managerial class, like who want to be rewarded in the system, and themselves, and they think they have some sort of moral, North Star that is above, like, right wingers, right? And so, like, that's my question. Who are we talking about? Because I have no faith in those people, zero. I've organized alongside them, and in fact, they were the ones who were happily and morally, virtually throw the dogs on me when I was fucking opposing the mandates. I have no hope in those fucking people, who might be in the top 20% or some shit, who are more proximity to power, like, and this is why I'm so, I rail so much against the educated class, because that was evidence to me during COVID, right? Like, it's not everyone, of course, but as a whole, I have no faith in people who have been institutionalized, more than other people, right? In the sense of like education, right? Like the formal education. And that's why I keep going back to my, again, uneducated, unskilled mother and brother, who actually have kept the North Star more than I have. Even when I went to college and I thought I knew every fucking thing, and I had a better moral sense of the world. So when I condemn, that kind of sector, I condemn it myself, because I was that person. I had to learn my fucking lessons, right? So that's why I asked, who the fuck is the working class? Because I have no faith in techies. I don't. Like, they're kind of they're lumped in that, and there may be some, like, in anything, right? Like, some radical elements, some people who might be willing to stick their neck out, but by and large, like, as long as if they have some proximity to the quality, because shit is bad, but it's not bad for everyone. That's the reality. It's not bad for everyone. There's people who are traveling the world, they're fucking dining out, and and they don't have to worry about fucking insurance. So, that's what I asked. Who the fuck is the working class? Like, they might be workers, but they're living the master's house. So that's why, like, sometimes I struggle with that. Like, we say working class, but like, there's plenty of workers who are like, we went to San Francisco yesterday, and like, fuck, like, driverless cars are everywhere. Like, it's a matter of weeks, months, until they have school buses that are self-drive and everything else, delivery, everything. It's just like right there. And so, like, again, when I see Mamdani, and this is something I said on that thread, is that what it actually shows me is that there will be a different world for the cities and then everyone else, because I live in a rural place, and the feel is way different, right? And those cities might be locked out, or more surveilled and more managed, and there's also that dynamic, right? There's a difference between city workers and people in rural areas, because I can tell you by experience, by working in a fucking factory that's feeding the fucking city. So who the fuck are the workers that are gonna do shit?
Yeah, I want to tell a little bit about what I saw in the mission. I have never seen the mission, like 24th Street and Mission, like it was. And I didn't notice until I walked right in front of the BART station, because we kind of met at La Boheme around the corner. And then we ate at that torta place. It was delicious. Then me and my boys walked, towards 24th Street along Mission. And, what I saw was the whole sidewalk in front of the BART station crowded with people trying to sell stuff. And there was usually like a little bit of that, you'd have some people with their CDs laid out, but like, it was literally like crowded on the sidewalk. Like every inch was like someone, and a lot of the stuff for sale was like clearly food they had gotten from like from the food pantries, right? Like, these are like beans. They're just like hoping to get a few bucks selling the beans they got from the charity, right? So like the level of, it was almost like this is what the market reduces people to, and there was a real desperation there. And I've never seen it like that. It was, and it makes me think about, the trajectory of the left that I've lived through, and how people like Eric Blanc, because I do think there's a thing where the dishonesty does actually make a lot of sense to me, Andy. And, because Eric Blanc, like us, but Eric Blanc was more explicitly in the Trotskyist tradition of the transitional program, where it's like basically Trotsky tried to lay out kind of like a formula for building a revolutionary organization, which is interesting now, because now he's putting forward a very different but almost similar kind of formulaic approach. Like, first we have to do this, and then this will happen, right? And we saw with the Sanders campaign, like the success of the Sanders campaign, people like Eric were basically like, this is not working. Just building the little radical organization is a failure. And then he identifies that with Lenin, and basically people are saying we have to basically abandon Leninism, right? Which, what they meant by that was abandon trying to build explicitly revolutionary, like trying to build small organizations with high level of theoretical agreement, right? But he didn't just declare, let's abandon Leninism. He used his intellect to essentially go and do some research, some of which is very interesting and valuable. But he basically had already figured out, or at least decided, or through his own experience, really felt and determined that this idea of trying to build explicitly revolutionary organizations was a failure. And then he set about researching history to essentially find evidence for that assumption that we can't actually build real, like, explicitly revolutionary organizations. And of course, there's lots of ways to support that. And I don't know that he's wrong in that, and I do think we should critique Lenin, but someone like him who is positioned as an intellectual in that sort of reformist labor movement space, because all of his upbringing, he was trained to understand the history of the labor movement, dynamics of labor organizing. This is somebody who was primed to become essentially a professional intellectual in the era of like the Sanders campaign, the era of we're going to rehabilitate a sort of socialist banner within the Democratic Party. So to me, basically, I'm lucky. I did math and I got a math job. But like, if I was concerned for having a career and having some legitimacy, and I was Eric Blanc, it was a perfect time to renounce Leninism and discover Second International, to revive Kautsky, so that I could become a professional intellectual at the head of some broad reformist thing. Meaning, like, there's no, whether it's really opportunism, like he's justifying his own actions or justifying his own position, or he genuinely believes that, what he's saying, there's no benefit to him to point out the actual militancy, because he's saying basically that that's not the important thing. He's basically, and underneath all that is essentially, by rejecting Leninism, he rejected, and this is explicit, rejected the idea that there would be essentially an uprising against the state. He rejected the idea that regular people could actually rebel in a broad-based way against the state. So part of his assumption that you couldn't do it, the underlying assumption really was that there will never be an insurrection, and it will never be successful, even if there is one. And if you just close that off, if you close off that possibility, not only is it very good for your career right now, but it also leads you directly in the direction that he's going, which is that, well, really there's no fighting the state. I mean, really, in a sense, is if you can't beat them, join them, and then maybe, But to me, if you assume that there can never be a successful insurrection, then you're also assuming there can never be real full socialism run by working class people, right? So in that sense, I'm still a Leninist. I'm not a Leninist in the sense that I think we need to build little sects, and I'm certainly not a Trotskyist where I think you have to have the exact right program in order to proceed. But the fact that I still believe and focus on the kinds of things that Andy was talking about, like the actual refusal that occurs, the actual rebellion that pops up every now and then, like that is the stuff that I think I think conscious revolutionaries should be using as their metric, and should be thinking about how do we give that kind of thing an actual coherent political home. Because that to me is like a symbol of like the actual initiative of controlling our own society.
Yeah, and I will say Kenny also raised the question of where is the working class? Well, you won't find them expressed here on our channel or on the internet. You won't find. I don't think you're going to find them too much. It'll be partially expressed in the polls, but there's a whole bunch of people who don't vote that we don't know anything about, and there are a bunch of people who don't vote on the countryside, and there's a bunch of people who don't vote in the city. We don't know what to make of those folks. And there's desperation outside the city, and there's desperation inside the city. And so for me, I do believe there's a working class. Like, I don't think my fear is it's going to be largely reduced from a majority class into a non-majority class through AI. I mean, there's a fear I have of that, and I wonder what happens to the prospects of revolution then. But I'm gonna put that aside. I do believe there's a working class, that people who can only make a living through their wages and who every day are exploited and robbed by the capitalists, like every hour when they work for them. And that robbery takes the form of wealth that accumulates at the top. And I think the ruling class knows there's bitterness around that, which is why there are figures like, in my belief, not just Mamdani, but Marjorie Taylor Greene, and maybe Tucker Carlson. I'm not as sure what Tucker Carlson is doing recently, but you had this centrist Democratic Party of Biden and Kamala Harris literally make itself like seemingly peter out. And then you had MAGA, arise as this alternative, so-called alternative to it, but then it's taken the form of it. And now you have a break from the MAGA party, from the MAGA thing. And so what do you see with Mamdani and Marjorie MTG? You see basically the phoenix rising from the ashes again to resuscitate and get people back into that same system. And so I do believe that same device of keeping people built into a position of hope and spectating through participating in the electoral system, that's what I think these figures represent. It is frustrating to me that we have revolutionaries talking about that as something that is like something that could provide us a possibility for change. But like you said, I agree with you, Michael, about Eric's version of it. Like, that's as good explanation as any. But one of the things that's most concerning for me is to once again see how the system itself is already, even as it betrays people from both sides, the red and the blue, how it's already preparing to scoop them back up into 2026 and 2028. And I know you sent something out about the general strike proposal in 2028, and I didn't say anything, but like, the general strike that's being proposed in 2028 can be nothing other than something organized around getting a Democrat elected in 2028. You don't organize a general strike right now in 2028 unless you are planning to use every last ounce of your power to try to get whatever fool the Democratic Party has, maybe it'll be AOC, I don't know, elected. And so that's what that general strike is. That general strike is completely captured and intent with keeping the system of system of having people observe what the world happening to them rather than acting within it continue to take place, which I do believe is happening both on the left and the right. Like, neither of those two sides offer any hope. Although I know there's a lot of people who are on the MAGA side who feel like they've been betrayed by Trump, who think Marjorie Taylor Greene is like maybe somebody who is going to fight for them. And no, she's bringing you back into the system. That's all she's doing.
You don't think her stepping down is a sign of something?
No, she's going to run for governor, and then she's going to say, maybe she might even do a third party thing, but it's all going to dovetail right back in the Democratic Party. And one of the major tips of it was she's so stuck with the immigration stuff. Like, she didn't want to say anything about AI. And that tells me that she knows what her talking points are. So she's still in the game. Like, she's not taking on anything that people are really facing. And it's not because she's ignorant. And her ability to talk about, breaking open the duopoly and in no way talking about Silicon Valley and artificial intelligence is to me, exposes the fact that she's a fraud. because she plans on fighting once again for some place at that pie where the AI capitalist system that we're building, is something that she can be a leader of and a part of. She's not looking to challenge anything on any base.
I don't know as much about her funding, but I did want to state that George Soros did funnel a lot of money into the Mamdani campaign, and I do think that there is a sense in which Mamdani is essentially like a test case for the future of the Democratic Party. They've got to essentially, because it's just hard to describe how dead they were otherwise. I mean, it really is. Mamdani's campaign, in a sense, is the resuscitation of the Democratic Party itself, and like rebuilding the legitimacy of the Democratic Party, and people's hope in possibly improving their lives through the Democratic Party. And I think you misspoke. I don't think Marjorie Taylor Greene will bring people back into the Democratic Party.
Oh,
I think
Party, yeah.
she'll probably, she's on the Republican side.
Yeah.
And to me, if you look at the way things are shifting, especially around positions around Israel, you got to rebrand yourself so you can capture that audience, right? Which is like, I found it interesting. Tucker Carlson finally did this whole in-depth thing on the 9/11 frauds. all this weird stuff about 9/11. It seems like, wow, maybe it seems like they were lying about something. They are seeing that there's a clear demographic that is, in market terms, a market that they can tap into. And, Mamdani is the other side of that.
Yeah. Oh.
Meanwhile, I just really want more people to throw bricks at ICE and, get together and figure out how to do that on an organized basis. But I don't know how to support them, really.
I do believe people are trying to, like, the idea of not letting your family members and coworkers be snatched by the state. That's an important thing. That is a radical act. But I do believe the part of the notion that Eric Blanc is speaking to, of socialism being a revolution, being more in the bones of society, does speak for me of the need for something to be built that's an alternative. Workers' councils is what we talked about before, and which was not something that the socialists at the time called for. But something different that represents workers in some way, that's being built. And that's the other thing that I think is missing, is a sense of creation among the working class. And that it is fighting and resisting and uprising, but it is in conjunction with creation. And I would actually say creation even before uprising. Before the insurrection were the workers' councils. And they were there for many months before there was an insurrection. The insurrection is necessary, but it's generally, I do believe, on the basis of the need to defend the institutions you as the working class have built. And so that, I believe that what's really lacking on our side is organized creation as much as organized fighting.
I want to emphasize this difference, right? Like, that's how I see in terms of, again, the working class, because the people who voted for Mamdani and the people who throw bricks at ICE are different to me. They're way different, and even though you might classify them as somewhat on the left, right? Like, but they're way different, because I know I'll get the cops from the Mamdani people. Mamdani himself, right? Like, his platform, his cooperation with the cops, and that I'm sure comes with surveillance and all that shit, right? Like, that sector will conquer the ones who will throw bricks at fucking eyes, right? And ask you to be civilized, essentially. And so that's what I ask. That's what, for me, that question is so present. Who the fuck is the working class? Who the fuck is the revolutionary working class? Right? Like, that's the big question, right? And I just don't see how it comes out of people who have a stake in making sure their stocks are fucking gonna survive, or or that they transfer their money into gold, right? When there is some sort of system switch, right? I just don't see it, and I think there's two different like interest groups, right? And by and large, San Francisco at this point is like, you have to be part of the Mamdani type of cohort section of the workers, really, that are actually aspirational capitalists, right? Like, because they have a big stake in the system, a big stake in like that they'll survive the bubbles that are going to burst. And so that, to me, is an important question to kind of have present as we attempt to organize, because it's just again, the fuckers who are going to manage the fucking fences, and the ones who are going to be outside those fences, or be tracked.
Read Eric Blanc's article. It's worth. We'll put it in the description below.
Oh, another thing I really want to plug is, on this question, I really appreciated the Platypus Affiliated Society's approach, which was they organize panels with a diverse set of people from the left and have a debate. And the one that we should post the one that I posted to the list too, because it has a really great counterpoint. It also has someone who was involved in the Mamdani campaign, essentially, who was also critical of it, essentially talking about what it meant to them to be active in it. So I also wanted to, I think it's worth reading the transcript and then seeing or listening to the podcast that they did on it.
Yep.
Because it's honest. It feels honest,
All right. I think this is a good place to thank you for including me, Andy. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you have heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms. On the Spotify, iTunes podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. And you can find any of that wherever you found this episode, or in the links to these in the episode notes. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us to our blog. I'm with co-host Kenny Cepeda, Michael Hoffman, and Andy Lipson. Thank you all very much, and we'll check you out next time. Ciao. Where did you all send this privately?
Well, it wasn't private, but Brian had sent it to me because we know Eric LeBlanc, and we complain about.
Where's this other group? Is there a chat I'm not a part of?
Well, like this Marxist study group, Jeff Strahl, Michelle, Wendy, Bo Elder, and then Michael was, on the thread. Kenny was on the thread because they're Marxists.
Is it because I'm not a Marxist?
That's correct. I think I left you off for that.
Shit.
See?
Andy, and you proclaim to have my back, Andy. I knew this was going to happen. We are finally in a place where the Marxists team up.
I have your back. I just am trying to stab.
No, you don't. Apparently, you don't.
I'm putting a knife in it.
See, this Marxists are already planning to rule by decree.
Right.
Need to know basis only. That's how I run.
Shoot.
I regret that, though. I do regret keeping you off that thread.
I assumed you were on it. I'll keep an eye next time. Sorry.
No, and now Ken is a part of it too. All of you are part of it. I knew it.